The warning ignored. Carl Jung issued a warning that most people still refuse to hear. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. This is not philosophy or theory. This is psychological fact. What we deny in ourselves does not disappear. It accumulates in the unconscious, gains power, and eventually erupts in ways we cannot control, destroying what we have built, harming those we love, turning us into the very thing we claim to despise. The shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, everything that contradicts our self-image, everything we have pushed into darkness because it threatens who we believe ourselves to be. And Jung's warning is clear. Ignore the shadow at your peril. Deny it, and it will possess you. Project it, and you will create enemies. Repress it, and it will erupt. The only path is confrontation, integration, making conscious what we have kept unconscious. This is Jung's warning. Most will ignore it. The question is whether you will be one of them. What is the shadow? Your dark twin. The shadow is not simply your flaws or mistakes. It is everything you have disowned, everything you have decided is unacceptable, everything you cannot admit without threatening your self-concept. If you believe yourself kind, your shadow contains your cruelty. If you pride yourself on rationality, your shadow holds your irrationality. If you identify as strong, your shadow carries your weakness. The shadow forms through a lifetime of rejection. As children, we learn which aspects of ourselves receive approval and which bring punishment or shame. The disapproved aspects do not disappear. They sink into the unconscious, forming what Jung called the shadow, a dark twin that contains everything we refuse to be. But the shadow also contains gold, potentials you never developed because they did not fit who you were supposed to be. The person who lived always responsible has a shadow full of spontaneity and freedom. The person who was always good has a shadow containing vital energy and authentic desire. The shadow is not only negative, but everything excluded, everything that did not fit the narrow identity you constructed. Jung's warning is that the shadow, whether dark or golden, demands recognition. Deny it, and it will find other ways to manifest, ways you cannot control. The danger: what we deny controls us. Jung's most disturbing insight is this: what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. The shadow we refuse to face does not remain passive. It acts through us, possesses us in moments when defenses are lowered, erupts in ways that seem to come from nowhere but actually come from the rejected parts of ourselves we have spent our lives denying. The controlled person suddenly explodes in rage they cannot explain. The moral person commits betrayals they cannot reconcile with their self-image. The rational person is flooded with emotions that overwhelm their logic. These are not random failures, but shadow possessions. Moments when what we have denied seizes control and acts through us while we watch helplessly or rationalize the behavior afterward. The danger is that the more strongly we deny the shadow, the more power it gains. The person who insists they have no darkness, who identifies completely with being good, who refuses to acknowledge their capacity for cruelty or selfishness or destructiveness. This person is most vulnerable to being possessed by their shadow. Because they have no conscious relationship to their darkness, they cannot regulate it, cannot recognize it approaching, cannot choose how to engage with it. Jung's warning: deny the shadow, and it will control you. Projection: how the shadow destroys relationships. The shadow's most common and most destructive manifestation is projection. We take what we cannot acknowledge in ourselves and see it in others. The person who cannot admit their own dishonesty sees liars everywhere. The person who has rejected their sexuality sees the world through a sexualized lens. The person who denies their aggression perceives constant threat and hostility from others. This is not conscious lying. Projection operates automatically, beneath awareness. We genuinely see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. And this perception feels like objective observation rather than subjective distortion. We are convinced we are seeing reality when we are actually seeing our own rejected shadow reflected back. Jung's warning is that projection destroys relationships. We attack in others what we cannot face in ourselves. We judge, condemn, feel superior to those who carry our projected shadow. Partners, friends, family members become screens onto which we project our darkness, and then we punish them for qualities that actually belong to us. The most intense reactions reveal projection. What triggers you most, what you judge most harshly, what you cannot tolerate in others. This points directly to your shadow. Your enemy is your mirror, showing you what you refuse to see. Collective shadow, evil in groups and nations. Jung's most terrifying warning concerns the collective shadow, what happens when entire groups, nations, or cultures deny their darkness and project it onto others. This is how genocides become possible, how ordinary people commit atrocities, how civilized nations descend into barbarism. The Nazis projected their collective shadow onto Jews, seeing in them all the evil they could not acknowledge in themselves. Every persecution, every holy war, every genocide follows this pattern. The group designates another group as evil, as less than human, as carrying all the darkness the group refuses to see in itself. And then violence against the projected enemy feels righteous, feels like fighting evil, feels justified by moral certainty. Jung witnessed this in Nazi Germany and warned that it could happen anywhere, that no nation is immune, that the more a culture insists on its own goodness and superiority, the more dangerous its collective shadow becomes. America, Europe, any nation that believes itself purely good, that cannot acknowledge its own capacity for evil, is vulnerable to projecting that evil onto enemies and then committing atrocities while convinced it is serving righteousness. Jung's warning, the collective shadow, when denied, creates the conditions for mass evil. The cost of denial, personal and cultural destruction. The cost of refusing to face the shadow is not abstract or distant. It is immediate, personal, devastating. Relationships destroyed by projection. Careers ruined by shadow eruptions. Lives derailed by behaviors that seem to come from nowhere, but actually come from rejected parts of ourselves, demanding recognition. On the cultural level, the cost is even higher. Wars fought against projected enemies, persecutions justified by moral certainty, systems of oppression maintained by collective denial of our own capacity for cruelty and exploitation. The 20th century revealed what happens when collective shadow is denied. The Holocaust, the gulags, genocides across continents. Technological civilization turned toward mass destruction. Jung warned that this would continue, that humanity had not learned the lesson, that we still prefer to see evil in others rather than acknowledge it in ourselves. Every generation believes it is different, believes it would never commit the atrocities of previous generations, while remaining blind to its own shadow, its own capacity for the same evils it condemns in others. The cost of this denial is not just personal dysfunction but cultural catastrophe, not just individual suffering but collective violence, not just private pain but public horror. Jung's warning remains urgent. Face the shadow or be destroyed by it. The path, facing what you fear to see. Jung's warning comes with a path. The shadow can be integrated, can be brought into consciousness, can be transformed from enemy into ally. But this requires courage, requires facing what you have spent your life avoiding, requires seeing in yourself the qualities you have always condemned in others. The path begins with recognition. Notice what triggers you, what you judge most harshly, what you cannot tolerate in others. These reactions point directly to your shadow. What you most strongly criticize in others is likely what you most strongly deny in yourself. Withdraw your projections. When you find yourself convinced someone else is terrible, ask, is this my shadow? Am I seeing in them what I refuse to see in myself? This does not mean the other person does not have the quality you perceive. It means your reaction, the intensity of your judgment, reveals your shadow more than their reality. Face your capacity for what you condemn. You are capable of cruelty, of selfishness, of violence, of betrayal. Not hypothetically, but actually. The circumstances that would activate these capacities may never arise, but the capacities exist. Acknowledge this without acting on it. Know your darkness without being possessed by it. The integrated shadow is the shadow recognized, accepted, brought into consciousness, where it can be regulated, rather than left in the unconscious, where it operates autonomously. This is not about becoming evil, but about becoming whole. Not about acting on every dark impulse, but about acknowledging that the impulses exist. Jung's final warning: the work is not optional. You will face your shadow consciously through integration or unconsciously through possession. The only choice is which path you take. Conclusion: Carl Jung's warning about the shadow is not comfortable, not reassuring, not what most people want to hear. We prefer to believe we are good, that evil is something other people do, that we are exempt from the darkness we condemn in others. But Jung's psychology insists otherwise. Everyone carries a shadow. Everyone is capable of what they judge in others. Everyone has darkness they refuse to acknowledge. The warning is urgent because the consequences of denial are severe. Personally, the denied shadow erupts in destructive ways, possesses us in moments of weakness, destroys relationships through projection, prevents wholeness through continued splitting. Collectively, the denied shadow creates the conditions for mass violence, for persecution, for atrocities committed while convinced we are serving good. But the warning also contains hope. The shadow can be integrated. The darkness can be made conscious. We can acknowledge our capacity for evil while choosing not to enact it. We can recognize our projections and withdraw them, can become whole rather than remaining split between the good we claim to be and the darkness we deny. Jung's warning is not meant to discourage but to wake us up, not to induce guilt but to call us to consciousness, not to make us despair about human nature, but to recognize that awareness is the only defense against being controlled by what we refuse to see. The shadow is real. The danger is real. But so is the possibility of integration, of wholeness, of living consciously rather than being possessed unconsciously. Jung's warning is clear. Face the shadow or be destroyed by it. The choice is yours. If Jung's warning has disturbed you, if you recognize your own shadow in what has been described, if you see the projections you have been making or the darkness you have been denying, then you have taken the first step toward integration. Recognition is the beginning of change. Subscribe to this channel for content that explores Jungian psychology without softening its difficult truths, that insists on facing what is uncomfortable rather than offering easy reassurance. Share this with someone who needs to hear Jung's warning, who needs to understand that their projections are destroying relationships or that their denial is creating danger. Leave a comment sharing what you recognize in your own shadow, what projections you have withdrawn, what darkness you have faced. This community exists for those willing to do the difficult work Jung demanded, the work of making the unconscious conscious, of integrating the shadow, of becoming whole. Remember, you have a shadow. This is not accusation but fact. The question is whether you will face it consciously or be controlled by it unconsciously. Jung's warning is clear, and the choice is yours.